Right. Hello, everybody. It looks like we are getting started here. So welcome to our next reports masterclass. I am Dr. Stephanie with the ChiroTouch Cloud onboarding team. And with me today as well is Justin, one of our product managers. We have a presentation that we're going to go through today in a little bit here to break down just some of the differences in some of the reports. So again, welcome to everyone. Thank you for joining us. We did do this one other time in August. We reviewed our end of day reporting in August. So if that is something that you missed and you would like to visit again, it is currently in community. I've got a little screenshot here. If you come down, it's just underneath the little green spotlight that's here, ChiroTouch Webinars. You can click the watch now and that recording is there. So thanks for being here again. And just for an overview, the reports that we're going to focus on reviewing today are on the screen here. So these are our payment details by rendering provider, the rendering provider monthly charges and collections, procedure code, productivity, and simple practice analysis. So let's jump into our payment details by rendering provider report. This report is, I'm going to guess, the probably the biggest one we're going to cover today. It's utilized by a lot of offices, and we want to make sure everyone understands how the numbers there are calculated. So this report provides the net allocations for the selected time range, which you can customize. It helps the practice understand how each payment is contributing to a particular provider services. And it's a great tool for practices who are paying their providers based on how much they brought in. And the caveat there is very important, not just what they brought in, but how much of what was brought in during those visits was actually applied to the charges on those dates of service. And we just have a quick note here. If there's a charge that isn't part of an encounter or isn't attributed to a provider, those are going to be coming through classified as unassigned. So if you ever see an unassigned section on this payment details by rendering provider report, it would be because of this particular item here. One example would be fees. Those aren't able to be attributed to a provider. So that would be something that you're seeing there. So payment details by rendering provider, if you come up here to analytics, and we're going to come next door to reports, it's in our collections and productivity section, and that is this payment details by rendering provider. Just as a quick note, if you guys notice these little eyes, it's like a little info bubble that you can open. And this will provide a summary of what that report is going to cover and any details that might help you decide if this is the one you want before you actually run it. So keep in mind that's what these little shortcuts are for. But if we actually go to run that report, it's going to let you set some parameters. You do get the option to see all providers, or you can pick and choose from in your system who you want included. So this is what that report looks like. Mine is pretty small, which we kind of did on purpose. These can get kind of crazy, especially if you're taking a lot of payments, which lots of payments are good because that means you're making a lot of money. But for the purposes of just demoing and showing you today, we've got a smaller one here so that we can break it down a little bit more specifically for you. So what do you need to keep in mind about this payment details by rendering provider report? This report is based off of your allocations. So if you took a payment from a patient on a particular day and it was not allocated, it will not appear on that report. And we have really good logic for that, and we're going to explain why. It will appear, though, whenever it was allocated. So example, let's pretend a patient came in on September 1st and they paid their $20 copay. However, maybe that payment the patient gave you wasn't allocated until later on in October. That $20 payment that you took on September 1st then will appear in this particular report for the month of October, because that's when it was allocated to that particular patient's visit. I think that this may be the detail. There are occasions where offices think, or they're reporting into us, that this report is incorrect. And oftentimes it's just because the payments were not actually allocated when they were received. And that's why they're showing up at different timeframes than when the office is expecting it to appear. So some best practices for using this report effectively. First thing is to make sure that your charges are posted for that date of service on the day that it was actually performed. And a really easy way to find any visits that don't have any charges associated with them, if you come to your practice ledger, say on activity, come to charge status, you're going to look for none posted and click apply. You can play with your date range here if you want to filter just for today, or leaving it wide open like that will show you every visit in your system that doesn't have charges posted. If I were running a larger office, this would be something that would be in my employee handbook for people to know how to do their job. And I would have my front desk or my staff be running this probably at lunchtime and also at the end of my business day before the day closes, in an attempt to make sure that all my charges are posted for the day. So this is going to be your first line of defense to try to ensure that charges are posted, because you cannot allocate a payment if there is nothing to apply that payment to. Next, we'll just stay here in my PowerPoint here. You want to make sure that your payments that you take in on a given day are allocated on that day. Or, comma, you could say they're allocated inside of the month or the time frame in which you know you need that money to count. So if that patient in our example had given you $20 on September 1st, you really want to, at the end of September 1st, do an auto allocate in your system to try to make sure that that payment is going to count that day. If it really only matters to you that it counted sometime in September so that that provider maybe is going to get credit for it, then as long as you're auto allocating or checking your allocations throughout the month, then you should catch it as long as you're getting it done before September 30th. But it would probably be a good practice just to check that at the end of each day also. So if you want to look for unallocated payments in your system, after you look for no charges posted, come to payments. We've seen unallocated here. Again, I'll take off that previous date, but then come to payment status and select unallocated and click apply. Now I've got a bunch of old ones here because I practice in here, but this would show you all of your unallocated payments, and then you could go through, and if you'd like to, you can come up to your action menu to do a select all and then auto allocate. It will auto allocate whenever it can. If you have multiple pages, don't forget to check those to make sure those payments are allocated. So we're making sure our charge is posted on the day that it was performed so that you can then allocate the money on the day that you take it. Very important details. The other option too are the items within the software that ensure your auto allocation. So if you go into your settings here, in your billing settings, in automated settings, there are options here for automatic allocation of patient payments. This will ensure that any payment that's entered directly on the ledger is going to be allocated. And I would just like to point out too, you can do an auto allocation from the practice ledger, but you can also do it in the patient's individual ledger as well. So those same filters are going to be here. Unallocated, you want to see all of them and click apply. I can do a select all and then ask the system to search and allocate those funds for me. Now, I want to point out though, I may have taken those payments, I could have taken them back in June, but if I never applied them to anything, they would now be counting in today's report or this month's report for October because I just allocated them today. So please keep that in mind. Those reports or those payments you just saw me allocate were allocated in October. So regardless of when they were actually entered into the system, they're going to pull up on my payment details by rendering provider report here in the month of October, because that is when I finally connected it to those charges. So again, it's good to make sure your charges are posted for that day on that day that it was performed. You want to make sure that your payments you're taking in are allocated either on that day or shortly thereafter to make sure that they're ending up inside of the month that you want them to count for. And you can do that by making sure you've enabled auto allocation of patient payments in your settings. Also, one thing I didn't mention yet, when you take payment on the checkout screen, it does automatically allocate to that day, assuming that there's patient balance due. So that would be another item to make sure. You do want to make sure that whatever charges you're posting, there is actually money due for them that day. Otherwise, if it looks like the patient doesn't owe anything, then it won't apply that payment to those patients' charges. And then if you visit the practice ledger at the end of each business day, you can do an auto allocate for any unallocated payments to try to keep those caught up so that they're not accumulating and getting applied in a different month, for example. So we do get some questions asking, why is it like this? And the reason really is because our goal is to protect the integrity of your data and, very importantly, make sure that you have accurate statistics. And part of that is going to be making sure that you're not over or underpaying yourself or your associates. And so now, how could that happen? How could you over or underpay yourself or someone who works with you? So example one, let's pretend you received an insurance payment for $2,000 in the month of July. And this particular patient's case was being cared for by your associate who works for you. So that $2,000 that came in the month of July went into what that associate brought in for you that month. And it was used to calculate part of their salary and how much they got paid in the month of August. So this is how much you paid your associate in the month of August, included that $2,000 payment from July that had come in. Unfortunately, September rolls around, and that insurer actually took back that $2,000. And maybe it's because that patient's policy terminated and they paid it out by mistake. That $2,000 is now unallocated in the current month of September, and comes off of the associate's numbers in September, not in July. When that payment is taken back, if it is reflected in the month of July, unless you rerun your July numbers to double check, you wouldn't know. So if you were going to pay your associate's salary in the month of September, and you only run your August numbers to see what they brought in, you wouldn't be accounting for that $2,000 that your office had to return to that insurance company. In that case, you would either overpay your associate and you'd be shorting yourself, or you would have to constantly be running all of your monthly reports for every single month with all the money you're bringing in to be constantly recalculating how much you're supposed to be paying your associates, or yourself for that matter. And it's not just offices that take insurance that might have to deal with this. It's also going to be our cash offices. So as a different example, let's pretend you are just cash and your patient prepaid for their care. They paid $2,000 in full for their care package, and they paid it in July. And maybe this was a patient that your associate was taking care of. That money came into the system. It was allocated to that package, and it was counted for that associate's salary that month. So associate gets paid out in August based on that $2,000 that came in, which is all well and good. Well, September rolls around and this patient happens to let you guys know that they're moving to another state. They're not going to be able to finish their plan of care that they had prepaid for, and you need to refund them $800 for that unused care. So the way the system is set up right now in cloud is to unallocate that $800 in the month of September. That way you can make sure that you're accounting for the fact that the $800 was returned. So that's accounted for in the September numbers of that report so that you can calculate your associate's salary properly, because money that you had already paid out to the associate has now been returned to the patient. So again, in both of these instances, if this report was not based on allocations, you would have to constantly rerun your previous month's numbers to constantly recalculate what should be getting paid out to you or your providers. Using the allocated payments allows us to create a report for you so that you only have to focus on running that current month's numbers or time frame, because I know some people don't run on the calendar month. You might run, the 5th to the 5th or whatever it is. But this way you can have confidence that the numbers that you're using to calculate in the past are not changing. So I hope that makes sense. And I'm gonna let everyone know that, I mean, I have personal experience with this. The office I worked at previously, we had to deal with this every month. We actually maintained an Excel spreadsheet outside of our EHR where we entered these dollar amounts every single month. And we were constant, we basically ran them 12 months at a time. So we always ran, so right now it's October. Maybe we're running September, but we're actually running since for last year, September, and then refilling in the dollar amounts in the months as they change, because our previous system, if we did have to return money or do a take back for insurance, it was calculating in a month that it was originally put in. So if I brought that money in for the office and I got paid out on it, then the insurance company took it back later down the road. My boss would not have had a way to know to do that if he was only checking the current months. And that's a lot to have to keep track of and pay attention to. So the payment details by rendering provider report is based off when those allocations are completed. We do have an example of this report here. So as you can see, I ran this report for October. So this is October 1st through the 11th, that's today. And it is showing me all of the patient payments that have come in. And it's showing me, what it has applied to, which is fine. So you're still going to see the original dates of service where those payments are going back to. But because they're being allocated in October, they're showing here in the month of October. The next question that we get sometimes is, what about those takebacks? What happens when you do unallocate something? If you unallocate a payment, it will show in the month that it was unallocated in. So there's a $100 cash payment here that is showing as a negative because, whatever that reason is, it was returned to the patient. If this money was something that was paid out in August, that's money that we brought in August that I would have gotten paid for. But now it was returned in September or October, let's say. So now it needs to be taken out in the October report so that the numbers are accurate. So I know it feels like this is getting a little into the weeds, but the reason these reports are built on allocations is to make sure that the numbers in the past don't change on you, because you base a lot on that historical data. And if that was changing without your knowledge, then, things wouldn't be getting calculated properly. So I hope that makes sense. I know that it's a lot of detail, but this is a really important report, and we really want to make sure that everyone understands how it works and how to use it. So the next report that we're going to touch on is similar. It's rendering provider monthly charges and collections. So this will show the monthly statistics for those allocations, again, the allocations made to a provider services related to their allocation history in that time frame. And it's an overview of the provider's charges to compare the amount of collections made in a month. And we are going to pull up that report so that we can view that one together. So this is that report, and there is just a series of items here that you can look at, and it is going to be showing you your collections with a separate box here for your charges. Anything with an unassigned provider or location could be those fees coming in. And then Justin, I don't know if you have anything that you want to add here when it comes to the unassigned info, but I'll pause a second in case you do.
Yeah, so for unassigned location or unassigned provider, for the unassigned provider, you can attribute a purchase to a provider. Fees can unfortunately not be attributed to a provider at this time, but also if it's added through the ledger, it will be an unassigned location because we don't have a way to designate this action was performed at this location. So just to iterate on why you would see that unassigned location or unassigned.
Okay, great. Thanks. So this is that rendering provider monthly charges and collections. I just want to jump back to pull it up again. We're going to jump back and just pretend to pull it up in the past. And I'm going to leave the date there. So I went from September 1st forward. And so that is now going to be showing me the window for that. Now, again, I don't have tons of data in my system, so that's why some of this is shorter than probably what yours is going to look like. But this is looking at it through each month. And so I wanted to show that because I grabbed September 1st through October 11th. And This is monthly though. So this is just September and just October. So this one you can't edit by date. Like say you wanted September 15th through October 15th. It won't do that for you. So you're going to have to, this one is strictly by month. So if you do need something that you're explicitly selecting the dates for, that would be that first report that we covered, the payment details by rendering provider, because you can customize what those dates are. So that would be the difference there. Procedure code productivity report. This one is going to summarize your procedure code usage and productivity, of course. So this one's kind of neat. It can be organized by service date, payment date, or allocation date. And then practices can sort this by provider, location, or practice. So if we come back to the software here, again, we're in our collections and productivity section in our procedure code productivity report. These are the defaults that are set, but of course, these drop downs you can click in to customize what you're going to pull up. I'm going to, again, bring mine back to September. We'll do September 1st. And then you can narrow that down by provider and location. So if we click submit on that, this has pulled up that report. So I am now seeing that time frame at the top, and I happen to have it organized by service date. These are my 2 providers that performed services during this time frame, and these are the charges that they performed. So example, Dr. Cawley was not very busy this month, and he only did 1 shockwave, and he got 1 tip for that. Me, on the other hand, I was much more productive. So I had 16 shockwave services, and then so on down the list here, you can see that. So this is really great. It will split out by procedure code with the description here. And it is going to total for you. So, I happen to know my shockwave visit is in my system as $100. And because I had 16 of those now, it's adding up that $1,600 is what that amount is. So just a quick note, that will be the total for that unit of services based on what the individual, 1 unit would cost. If you come across here, you are going to be seeing a breakdown of if insurance payment was applied to that particular service, and then how much of a patient payment was. So this one's really neat because then you can start to see a breakdown of, well, how much, which of these services are really dependent on those insurance payments, and then how much of these services are actually being paid by the patient. It's not going to break down whether something was cash or maybe someone's copay or what have you. But this is a helpful report to see which services you're providing in your office are lucrative and also, getting paid for. The alternative to that would be, what services are you performing in your office maybe that are not getting paid for? So if you are constantly doing, electric stim to people, but it's never getting paid for, you do always want to do what's in the best interest of the patient. But if you maybe were doing that because you thought it was making more money for you, you might be able to use this report to see that it's not, and then you can evaluate who really does need to be having that service performed. So there's a lot of great things that you can see on this report that is going to help you maybe figure out better how to manage things in the office. While we're here, I just do want to talk about the tip for a second. I've been getting this question a lot in onboarding, and this will kind of come into play more often than not when offices have massage therapists in the office. They often, their clients often leave tips for them, and a lot of offices would like a way to to organize that in the system. The best way to be able to organize that and also see who got how much in tips is going to be to have a tip code in your main charge list, because then it can be attributed to that particular provider. I have seen some offices do tips as fees, and as Justin noted earlier, fees cannot be attributed to a particular provider or specialist in the office. So if you do need to be able to split out how much tip was brought in by each individual provider to make sure that you're getting that amount to them, You will want to create that tip code in your charge list, and then you'll be adding it onto those visits that day. You'll just have to visit the ledger to customize what the amount of that tip was. So just keep that in mind. That is something that has come up that would be the best way to handle it for your tracking purposes. Next up is going to be our simple practice analysis reports. And let's just jump to the transactions first. So again, I'm just going to bring this back to September and the 1st. And there are all these different parameters here that you can customize depending on what you would like to see in this report. So I won't click into all of them, but there are these different drop downs to let you determine what you want to see. Quick note, I am going to leave it as a week in case that is helpful. So we're going to click submit. And so right out of the gate, it is splitting things up by week. So I know a lot of offices don't necessarily track things by like week 35 or week 36, but this can be helpful if you'd like to split it up this way. Again, that was an option on the previous page. So if you don't like the week view, you can change that. But this is going to be just a high overview, that simple practice analysis for your transactions. It's showing you how much you've billed out or put in for your charges, and then the dollars that are being allocated. And if we scroll down to the last page here, there is a summary, and that'll total it all up for you at the end. So total payments allocated, dollar amount, and charges. So this is by each week, and then this is my second provider in the office. So that's how that practice is going to organize and split all those up for you. The bottom one here is the total for this entire report. So I know it's right after, but it doesn't have the little the week note there. So this was the summary. So we're going to close that one down. And I'm going to pull up the other one for the appointments. And this one's kind of neat too. This is just for today, actually. So hang on, I got to change my date so that we get some more information there. I'll bring that one back through September too. And here it is. So this is back to September. It's splitting it up for me by week. And this is really neat because this is pulling all of that, you know, the financial info is important and good to look at, but it's pulling the financials out of this and it's strictly looking at appointments. So this is a really great area to just get a summary of, you know, no-showed, canceled, how many appointments were checked in, walk-ins, etc. So this is going to give a really good overview by week of what's going on with your appointments in real time as you move throughout the year. You know, I'm the first provider in this list, and then Justin starts beneath me, and then Colley's is down below. I am going to ask Justin to jump in here. There was a cool figure that I liked on here. It's like your total number of unique patients seen in the week. If we're looking at 1 week, right? Do you want to direct me to this here? Let's look at the top row.
Yes. So for the top row for week 35, if we're looking at the patients column, if we look at the total patients there, we see 4, and that's the total unique patients we saw in that week. We then can break that down going upwards, or you could have broken it, you could have summed them up going down. So we saw one of those was a new patient, and 3 of them were current patients. And so we basically give you over that week, how many new patients did you see? We mark a new patient as their first appointment that is either active, checked in, or checked out. And the reason we do this is because we know that some offices don't always remember to check in or check out. And so we wanted to make this a little bit easier to track new patients. So the only way they wouldn't count is if they're a no-show, they're canceled, or they're deleted, which basically signifies that appointment no longer actually happened. And so they wouldn't be a new patient for that week because you would be seeing them a different week if you saw them at all. And so that's how we track your total unique patients. And then patients encountered, just to cover the whole column, is the unique number of patients who had encounters created for that week. So you can do a little bit of analysis on that.
Awesome. Thanks, Justin. That brings us to the end of what we were going to cover today. So I know we've had the chat going. We have seen some questions come in. There is a request for a report for collections and productions via that patient's preferred provider. That is something that the product team is looking at, and they are analyzing how that report could be built to bring out to you all in the future. Just while we're connected here, most of you probably are aware, but if you go into community, there is an area along the top for feature requests. So especially for reports, if there's something in addition to just any feature in general, reports that you would like, please come in here and make that suggestion. They do take those very seriously and use them to help create a roadmap of features that they'll be adding in for you. So it's really helpful when you go get those feature requests and ideas added in there. So please do that when you can, for sure. The other thing I'd like to point out too is if you are noticing discrepancies, if you've tried to account for the fact that, yes, I understand that payment was allocated during such and such a date, so it's in this report. As long as you've accounted for that and you understand that's where the money should be, if you are noticing any discrepancies in the reports, please, please, please let us know, because we don't want that to happen. Please let us know so that we can look into it and make sure that things are correct for you, because it's very important and we totally understand that. So there is a question on determining new patients. Justin, do we have a report that would be best for pulling that out?
So for new patients, I would say usually we want to track this over a longer period of time instead of like the end of day. So that's where in the simple practice analysis appointments, that new patient value is going to be the total new patients within that time period. So this is by week, and we can do by month, by quarter, by year. So that would be your new patients right here on this report. I see in that question, total PVs, total patient visits would be your total. We would want to track it by total checked out appointments, is really where I would recommend checking in and checking out your appointments. You can also go off of the appointments visual if you want to just know how many appointments did I have over this period of time. So we have our appointments dashboard, and you can say, okay, based off appointment type or appointment status, I can track what my patient visits look like. And then PVA, we actually don't have an actual report to do that, but you can take the data that we do provide and create a patient visit average over that period of time.
Correct. So Carrie has a question. If charges are not posted today, the patient copay that was brought in or posted today will not be auto-allocated. Carrie, that is correct. So if there's no charges, there wouldn't be anything to connect that payment to. It will wait on the patient's ledger as an unallocated payment that then you can either manually or auto-allocate whenever those charges are put in. I do want to point out, though, in that circumstance, if you did bring in a payment and it's not allocated, we reviewed this last time, but it should still display in your end of day reporting. So that way you can properly account for the money that has been brought in for like your deposit. So there is a column if there were unallocated payments to let you know, but they are included. So if you brought in $20 for that patient's visit, but it was unallocated, it's still money that you brought in. So it'll still be part of this bottom deposit section so that you are, properly making your deposits for what was truly brought into the office that day. All right, so we've got a question. It says, on my reports for patients, I think we're looking at the same one. Why is patients encountered versus appointments a different number?
That different number would signify that there are encounters that were not created. And so to that point, we would always want to make sure this would be kind of a red flag for us to say, okay, I have patients who I have not created encounters for. Let me go over, and we have this on the end of day, so it tracks a little bit better there. But then I can go over to my appointments without encounters visual and really run down, okay, who had I not created an encounter for? So that I believe is going to be under encounter staff. Yep, right over there. And then we have the encounters without appointments without encounters. So we'll give our patient, our MRN, the appointment date and what the appointment status was to kind of be able to weed through why there wasn't an encounter created, or does the provider have to go back and create a note?
Yeah, so in my report here then, maybe for this week 35, I had 4 appointments, but I only created an encounter for one of those appointments, right?
Right.
Yeah, so then I'd come here and be like, wait, who didn't get checked in that week? Or maybe did they truly no show for their appointment? In that case, you want to come and like reflect that they truly no showed. And that would take care of that if that's why there wasn't an encounter for that visit.
Right. We take them off that report if they're in a status that's not active, checked in or checked out. If they were canceled or no show or deleted, we take them off that report.
Great. Okay. Ken has a question. Does a prepayment that is allocated at a later date show up twice in the total collections? So it depends on what report we're going to talk about here, but Justin, right? The answer ultimately is no. It's only going to show up once if you're looking at your end of day reporting for the day that you entered it into the system.
Right. So depending on the report that we're looking at, if we're talking about total collections, I feel like we're more geared towards the payment details by rendering provider. And so in that sense, we won't see that collection until it's actually allocated, right? So if that's actually a good reason why we report based off of allocations, and we really drive to using that report. And that's because if I prepay back in, let's say, August for $200 worth of care, and I just now use that in October, well, I would have to keep track of that all the way back until August. I would have to keeping track of that August payment all the way through the life cycle. With the allocations model, you don't have to keep track of that. You just run the report for October, and once it's rendered, that's when it will count towards the provider that they've rendered a service using this amount of money and it's already been paid for, so you can actually pay them for that service.
So that's why we built the reports based off the locations, exactly that. So they don't show up twice, but then also if there's ever a change in what happens with that payment, it's always being accounted for currently with what has happened to it versus that change happening in the past and then you not knowing. And then you've either overpaid yourself or your associate, but you wouldn't know. So it's only going to be counting once. It just depends which report you're going to be looking at. If you need to account for it in your deposit that day, it'll be your end of day. If it's going to be, when was it connected to a visit that a provider had, it'll be in that payment details by rendering provider when it was allocated.
And while we are waiting for more questions, we will be doing more of these masterclasses geared towards other reports as well. So we're trying to focus on specific areas as we go through them. So we will be covering other reports, visuals, and application workflows to help track your performance and things like that over the next few months.
Melanie has a question regarding the number of appointments checked out in September and how many patients were encountered. I'd really want you to go back to your dashboard encounters and make sure that there aren't visits in this appointments without encounters. There could be appointments that were made that maybe that encounter was never created, or they could have no-showed and they weren't marked as no-showed. So that would be something that you do want to make sure is being tracked properly in the system when those things happen. So if an encounter is created but not signed, as long as the charge is posted, the payment will still be able to be allocated to it. That's a good question, Charlene. Yeah, the signature on a note is going to place a date and timestamp on that note and lock it down for editing. So if you sign an encounter, oh, I have one from today. If I sign this encounter, then I can't change it. I would have to reopen it, make a change, and then sign it again. And then there would be 2 notes in the history for this particular data service. The This does bring up a good point that's related to charges. If you need to make a change to your charges, but you've already signed the note, you could do that, but then the charges inside of the note will differ from what might be on that patient's ledger. So it would be, if you want your records to match, you check with your provider, but you're going to want to reopen that visit so that you can update the charges. Again, when you re-sign that note, it's going to have that note in its entirety. Someone would have to put them side by side to see what is different. They'll very simply be able to see that you updated your charges, and that would be the only difference. And then it'll just place your signature at the bottom with a new date and time stamp if you have re-signed that note. And just as an aside, if you want one place to look for encounters that haven't been signed, this is somewhat off topic, but kind of related since it's come up. Underneath that appointments without encounters are your unsigned encounters. And you just select that provider's name. I'm really bad at signing my fake notes, so I have a lot here. But this will give you a snapshot of every encounter that is not signed in the system in the event that you need to go find those and get them signed. These have been really good questions. All right, everybody. I think we're all out of questions, which is A-okay. So as Justin mentioned previously, we are going to be doing at least one more of these reporting webinars to make sure that everyone is familiar with the reports that are in your system so that you can maximally use them to support your objective with helping chiropractic get spread to the people and be profitable and organized. If there's anything you think of after we end the session today, please, 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 if you happen to be in onboarding still, send it to your onboarding specialist, but reach out to support. They're here for you. And if you had a question, they will make sure that they get the answer to you. So I just want to say thanks to everyone for coming again. This has been really great.
Thank you, everyone, for attending, and thank you for the awesome questions, and I look forward to next time.
Thanks, everyone. I hope you have a great day.